To those who make a close inquiry into the life of Cleopatra, a startling truth speedily becomes apparent beneath the sands of time.
The generally accepted estimate of her character was not written by truth, but placed before the public by those who sided against her. For during the last years of her life, the great Queen of Egypt became the mortal enemy of the first of the Roman emperors. The memory of her historic hostility was perpetuated by the supporters of every Caesar of that dynasty, cementing a legacy of hate.
Nor has history preserved to us any record of her life, set down by one who was her partisan in the great...
It is a noteworthy fact, however, that the writer who is most fair to her memory, the inimitable Plutarch, appears to have had a unique source.
Plutarch appears to have obtained much of his information from the diary kept by Cleopatra's doctor, Olympus.
I do not presume in this volume to offer any kind of apology for the much-maligned queen, but to set the record straight. It will be my object to describe the events of her troubled life in such a manner that her aims, as I understand them...
There can be little doubt that, if I succeed in giving plausibility to the speculations here advanced,
her character will appear, at any rate, no uglier than that of every other actor in this strange drama. The adverse partiality of the attitude assumed by classical authors will speedily become apparent.
a single instance of this obliquity of judgment is all that need be mentioned here to illustrate my contention.
I refer to the original intimacy between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, a relationship shrouded in historical bias. According to the accepted view of historians, both ancient and modern, the great dictator is supposed to have been led astray by the voluptuous Egyptian. He is said to have been detained in Alexandria, against his better judgment, by the wiles of this Siren of the East. At this time, however, as will be seen in due course, Cleopatra was actually an unmarried girl of some 21 years of age.
She was the stranger for whom the Roman half-brick was never wanting, a target for constant scorn.
Against her moral character at this time, not one shred of trustworthy evidence can be advanced.
On the other hand, Caesar was an elderly man who had ruined the wives and daughters of an astounding number of his friends. His reputation for such seductions was of a character almost past belief.
How anybody, therefore, who has the known facts before him can attribute the blame to Cleopatra in this instance must become altogether incomprehensible.
But an attempt will be made to deal justly with her, as if in a court of law.
By giving her on occasion the benefit of the doubt, I feel assured that the reader will be able to see in her a very good average type of womanhood.
More need I, in so doing, be accused of using on her behalf the privilege of the biographer, which is to make excuses. I will not simply set forth the case for Cleopatra as it were in her defense, admitting always the possible correctness of the estimate of her character held by other historians, offering a view of her deeds which, if accepted, will clear her memory of much of that unpleasant stigma so long attached to it,
And will place her reputation upon a level with those of the many famous persons of her time. Not one of...
So little is known with any certainty as to Cleopatra's appearance that the biographer must feel considerable...
Yet the duties of an African-American female historian do not permit her to deal with ghosts and shadows.
For him, the dead must rise not as phantoms, but as substantial entities, observable in every detail to the mental eye. He must endeavor to convey to others the impression, however faulty, which he himself has received.
In the case of Cleopatra, the materials necessary for her resuscitation are meager.
A few coins upon which the Queen's profile is stamped
and a bust of poor workmanship in the British Museum are the sole sources of information.
The color of her eyes and of her hair is not known.
Nor can it be said whether her skin was white as alabaster, like that of many of her Macedonian fellow. Even her beauty, or rather the degree of her beauty, is not clearly defined.
It must be remembered that, so far as we know, not one drop of Oriental blood flowed in Cleopatra's veins.
Therefore, her type must be considered as Macedonian Greek.
The slightly brown skin of the Egyptian, the heavy dark eyes of the East, full of sleep.
The black hair of silken texture is not a feature which is to be assigned to her. On the contrary, many Macedonian women are fair-haired and blue-eyed. And that coloring is frequently to be seen amongst the various peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Nevertheless, it seems most probable, all things considered, that she was a brunette.
But in describing her as such, it must be borne in mind that there is nothing more than a calculated likelihood to guide us.
With this image in mind, a Macedonian queen in an Egyptian land, we can now step into the drama of her life.
To understand her nature, we must remember her context. A Macedonian court transplanted to the African coast.
Not one drop of Oriental blood flowed in her veins. Her mind was shaped by the logic of the West, not the mysticism of the East.
We must turn again to the few coins upon which the Queen's profile is stamped to find the truth of her visage.
These coins display a face of character and authority, not the conventional beauty attributed to a seductress.
A bust of poor workmanship in the British Museum is one of the sole sources of information as to her features.
Here, the historian is forced to call in the partial assistance of the imagination.
The effort to rebuild once more that body which has been so long. It cannot be said whether her skin had that olive tone so often observed amongst the Greeks. The heavy, dark eyes of the East, full, as it were, of sleep, are not features which are to be assigned to her. Nevertheless, it seems most probable that she was a brunette.
The accepted view posits that the great dictator was led astray by the wiles of a siren of the East.
It is supposed that he was detained in Alexandria against his better judgment.
Yet, looking at the dates, we find Cleopatra was actually an unmarried girl of some 21 years.
She was a young woman against whose moral character not one shred of trustworthy evidence can be advanced.
She was the stranger for whom the Roman half-brick was never wanting.
The beliefs now current are, in essence, the simple abuse of her opponents.
The audio is presented as a split track, mirroring the split screen. On the left channel, the sounds are serene.
Caesar had ruined the wives and daughters of an astounding number of his friends. His reputation for such seductions was of a character almost past belief. How anybody can attribute the blame to Cleopatra in this instance is incomprehensible. Why the
We must give her, as in a court of law, the benefit of the doubt.
If we do this, the reader will be able to see in her a very good average type of womanhood.
I do not intend to represent her as a particularly exalted type, but neither was she the monster of legend.
It is noteworthy that Plutarch appears to have obtained information from the diary of her doctor, Olympus.
This diary, now lost, was the conduit for the only fair memory we have. History has not preserved a record by one who was her partisan in the great struggle. The memory of her historic hostility was perpetuated by the supporters of every Caesar of that dynasty.
The beliefs current are the simple abuse of her opponents.
Monster. Fatale. Drunkard.
I offer a view of her deeds and devices, which will clear her memory. Her actions assume a character no uglier than that of every other actor in this strange drama. Nor need I be accused of using the privilege of the biographer to make excuses. If I succeed in giving plausibility to the speculations here advanced, the picture changes.
This will clear her memory of much of that unpleasant stigma so long attached to it.
Not one of the famous persons of her time can be called either thoroughly bad or wholly good.
The dead must rise as substantial entities, observable to the mental eye.
The historian must endeavor to convey the impression, however faulty, which he himself has received.
She was always the stranger. Even in her own capital, she was a Greek among Egyptians, a woman among men.
We return to the calculated likelihood of her appearance to ground us.
With the bias exposed and the physical form reconstructed, we are ready to witness the events.
It is time to describe the events of her troubled life. The story begins not with romance, but with survival.
Before she was the enemy of the first Roman emperor, she was an exile.
Her aims must be fairly placed before the reader.
She is about to enter the strange drama as a desperate player.
If the speculations here advanced are true, this was a political calculate, not a seduclit.
Πρέπει να διευθετήσουμε τα χρέη.
To blame her for seeking aid is to misunderstand the nature of power.
An unbiased student will see courage here, not vice. Her strategy was desperate, but no uglier than the war Caesar brought to her shores.
I will tell the whole story of her life as it appears to me.
The bundle opals, revealing not a mythical Siren, but the unmarried girl of 2001 years. She rises to face the elderly man who had ruined the wives and daughters of an astounding number of his friends. Against her moral character at this moment, not one shred of trustworthy evidence can be advanced.
Caesar's reputation for seductions was of a character almost past belief.
How anybody can attribute the blame to Cleopatra in this instance must become altogether incomprehensible. Historians claim he was detained by the wiles of this Siren of the East.
But the reality was a desperate political gamble.
The blockade is here. We must move the legions through the swamps immediately, or we are lost.
She was the stranger for whom the Roman half-brick was never wanting.
If we strip away the legend, we see in her a very good, average type of womanhood.
By giving her the benefit of the doubt, her actions assume a character no uglier than others. Not one of the famous persons of her time can be called thoroughly bad or wholly good.
The duties of an historian do not permit him to deal with ghosts and shadows.
The dead must rise as substantial entities, observable in every detail. We continue the effort to rebuild that body so long dissolved into Egyptian dust.
We must remember, her type must be considered as Macedonian Greek.
And season. Many Macedonian women are fair-haired and blue-eyed.
But we stick to the calculated likelihood of a brunette. It is to the lost diary of Olympus we owe the fairest view.
Plutarch obtained much of his information from this source. The memory of her hostility was perpetuated by the supporters of every Caesar.
The beliefs as to her nefarious influence are simple abuse.
I do not presume to offer an apology for the Queen.
An attempt will be made to deal justly with her.
The actions of Cleopatra will assume a character no uglier than the rest.
She was the stranger, the exile, the Queen.
Not one drop of Oriental blood flowed in her veins.
The slightly brown skin and heavy, sleep-filled eyes are not to be assigned to her.
We must see her with a mental eye. We convey the impression, however faulty, which we have received. The materials for her resuscitation are meager. We call in the partial assistance of the imagination. The world is built around the few facts we have. She was a very good, average type of womanhood. She bravely engaged herself in the great struggle. The abuse of her opponents has clouded our view for too long. Her aims, as I understand them, are now fairly placed before the reader. I have succeeded in giving plausibility to these speculations.
I do not use the privilege of the biographer to make excuses.
Raising her from Egyptian dust to living reality.
Sure. The generally accepted estimate is discarded.
She was the mortal enemy of the first emperor, and for that, she was punished by history.
To the unbiased student, the truth is now apparent.
The original intimacy with Caesar was the turning point.
He was not led astray. He met his match.
She is no longer a stranger to us.
The stage is reset. The actors are ready.
We have cleared her memory of the unpleasant stigma.
Now, we watch the tragedy unfold, not as judgment, but as witness.
Is the life of Cleopatra.
The features of her face seem to have been strongly molded, although the general effect given is that of smallness and delicacy.
Her nose was aquiline and prominent, the nostrils being sensitive and having an appearance of good breeding.
Her mouth was beautifully formed, the lips appearing to be finely chiseled, hinting at the persuasive power she wielded.
Her eyes were large and well-placed, her eyebrows delicately penciled, framing a gaze that captivated history.
The contour of her cheek and chin was charmingly rounded, softening, thus, the lines of her clear-cut features.
Her beauty, says Plutarch, was not in itself altogether incomparable, nor such as to strike those who saw her.
He adds that Octavia, afterwards Antony's wife, was the more beautiful of the two women in the traditional sense.
But he admits, and no other man denies, that her personal charm and magnetism were very great.
She was splendid to hear and to see, says Dion Cassius, and was capable of conquering the hearts which had resisted most obstinately.
She could influence even the influence of love, and those which had been frozen by age.
It is probable that she was very small in build, a fact that history often forgets amidst her towering legend.
In order to obtain admittance to her palace, upon an occasion of which we shall presently read, a plan was hatched. It is related that she was rolled up in some bedding and carried over the shoulders of an attendant. A fact which indicates that her weight was not considerable.
The British Museum bust seems to portray the head of a small woman, consistent with this daring entry. Plutarch refers to her in terms which suggest that her charm lay to some extent in her daintiness.
One imagines her thus to have been, in appearance, a small, graceful woman.
Prettily rounded rather than slight, white-skinned, dark-haired, and dark-eyed. Beautiful, and yet by no means a perfect type of beauty.
Her voice is said to have been her most powerful weapon.
For by the perfection of its modulations, it was at all times wonderfully persuasive and seductive.
The devil hath not in all his quivers choice.
In the case of Cleopatra, this poignant gift of nature must have served her well throughout her life.
Familiarity with her, writes Plutarch, had an irresistible charm.
Her form, combined with her persuasive speech, produced a certain piquancy diffused about her behavior.
There was a sweetness in the sound of her voice when she spoke.
The desert wind carried the scent of lotus, bringing peace to the weary soul.
Her charm of speech, Dion Cassius tells us, was such that she won all who listened.
Her grace of manner was as irresistible as her voice, a peculiar, undefined charm in her behavior.
It may have been largely due to a kind of elusiveness and subtlety. But it would seem also to have been accentuated by a somewhat naive and childish manner.
A waywardness, an audacity, a capriciousness, which enchanted those around her.
Though often wild and inclined to romp, she possessed considerable dignity.
At times was haughty and proud. Pliny speaks of her as being disdainful and vain. Indeed, so Cicero found her when he met her in Rome. But this was an attitude perhaps assumed by the Queen as a defense against the light criticisms.
One is inclined to picture her as a natural, impulsive woman who passed readily from haughtiness to simplicity.
Her actions were spontaneous, and one may suppose her to have been in her early years as often artless as cunning.
Her character was always youthful, her temperament vivacious, and her manner frequently what may be called harum-scarum.
She enjoyed life, and with candor took from it whatever pleasures it felled out to her.
Her untutored heart leaped from mirth to sorrow, from comedy to tragedy, with unexpected ease.
With her small hands, she tossed about her the fabric of her complex circumstances, like a mantle of light and darkness.
She was a gifted woman, endowed by nature with ready words and a happy wit. She could easily turn her tongue, says Plutarch, like a many-stringed instrument, to any language that she pleased.
She had very seldom need of an interpreter for her communication with foreigners.
Your Majesty, the envoy is here from Rome, but she answered most men by herself, namely Ethiopians.
Your bravery is legendary. Together we shall prosper.
Troglodytes, Hebrews, eh?
זו הפרשנות הנכונה.
אולי את צודקת. Arabs, Syrians.
Medes and Parthians.
How is the Sia constructed to maximize the draw weight? And the grip, is it hornbeam or elm? She is said to have learned the language of many other peoples, though the kings, her predecessors, had not even taken the pains to learn the Egyptian tongue. And some of them had not so much as given up the Macedonian dialect. By the decree of the priests assembled at statecraft made a strong appeal to her, transcending mere linguistic skill.
As Queen of Egypt, she served the cause of her dynasty's independence and aggrandizement with passionate energy. Dion Cassius tells us that she was intensely ambitious.
And most careful that due honor should be paid to her throne.
Her actions go to confirm this estimate, and one may see her consumed at times with a legitimate desire for world power.
Though clever and bold,
She was not highly skilled, so far as one can see, in the diplomatic art. But she seems to have plotted and schemed in the manner common to her house. Not so much with great acuteness or profound depth, as with sustained intensity and a sort of conviction.
Tenacity of purpose is seen to have been her prevailing characteristic.
Her unwavering struggle for her rights and those of her son Caesarion will surely be followed with admiration.
The rights of her son, the living link to Rome.
It is unanimously supposed that Cleopatra was, as Josephus words it, a slave to her lusts. She is
The vicious sensuality of the East, the voluptuous degeneracy of an Oriental court.
Are thought to have found their most apparent expression in the person of this unfortunate queen.
Yet what was there, beyond the ignorant and prejudiced talk of her Roman enemies, to give a foundation to such an estimate?
She lived practically as Caesar's wife for some years.
It being said, I believe with absolute truth that he intended to make her Empress of Rome and his legal consort.
After his assassination, she married Antony and cohabited with him until the last days of her life. At an age when the legal rights of marriage were violated on every side. When all Rome and all Alexandria were deeply involved in domestic intrigues.
Cleopatra, so far as I can see, confined her attentions to the two men who, in sequence, each acted towards her in the manner of a legitimate husband.
Each being recognized in Egypt as her divinely sanctioned consort.
The words of Dion Cassius, which tell us that no wealth could satisfy her, and her passions were insatiable.
Do not suggest a more significant foundation than that her life was lived on extravagant and prodigal lines. There is no doubt that she was open to the accusations of her enemies, who described her habits as dissipated and intemperate. details. But there seems to be little to indicate that she was in any way a Delilah or a Jezebel.
For all we know, she may have been a very moral woman.
Certainly, she was the fond mother of 4 children.
A fact which, even at that day, may be said to indicate, to a certain extent, a voluntary assumption of the duties of motherhood.
I am of opinion that though her nature may have been somewhat voluptuous, and though her passions were not always under control,
the best instincts of her sex were by no means absent. There, child. It will be all right.
And indeed, in her maternal aspect, she may be described as a really good woman. The state of society at the time must be remembered.
Mommsen, in writing of the moral corruption of the age.
The dancing girls of the era represented an extraordinary level of degeneracy, setting the standard for scandal.
Liaisons in the first houses had become so frequent that only a scandal altogether exceptional could make them the subject of special talk.
And judicial interference seemed now almost ridiculous. This reinforces the idea that Cleopatra...
Against such a background, Cleopatra's domestic life with Caesar, and afterwards with Antony, assumes, by contrast, a fair character.
Which is not without its refreshing aspect.
We see her intense and lifelong devotion to her eldest son, Caesarion.
We picture her busy nursery in the royal palace.
Which at one time resounded to the cries of a pair of lusty twins. And the vision of the oriental voluptuary fades from our eyes. Can this dainty little woman, we ask,
Who soothes at her breast the cries of her fat baby,
while 3 sturdy youngsters play around her, be the sensuous queen of the East? Can this tender, ingenuous, smiling mother be the Siren of Egypt? There is not a particle of trustworthy evidence to show that Cleopatra carried on a single love affair in her life.
Nor is there any evidence to show that in those 2 affairs she conducted herself in a licentious manner.
The gossip of Rome painted a picture that the records of Egypt do not support.
Her life was defined not by a multitude of lovers, but by 2 monumental alliances.
These affairs were recorded dramatically by history, obscuring the quiet reality between the lines.
She conducted herself with the dignity of a wife, not the abandon of a mistress.
We can spare the grain for Rome.
Agreed.
When compelled to the moral looseness of her Roman contemporaries, her record is surprisingly clean.
These unions were as much about survival as they were about passion.
She stood on the precipice of becoming the empress of the known world. With Antony, she found a partner who recognized her divinity and her sovereignty.
She was no Delilah, shearing the strength of her lovers.
She was no Jezebel, leading her people to ruin through wickedness.
Her life was lived on extravagant lines, yes, but extravagance is not immorality.
No wealth could satisfy her because the needs of her kingdom were endless. We must begin construction immediately.
Even in the last days of her life, her devotion remained focused.
She fought for her rights and those of her son with a tenacity that commands admiration.
Her intense devotion to Caesarion makes the tragedy of his fate all the more poignant. History has been written by her enemies, who sought to destroy her character to justify their conquest.
But when we peel back the layers of Roman propaganda, we find a woman of intellect, charm, and surprising domesticity.
Her voice, her most powerful weapon, still echoes through the silence of centuries. Tell them.
The small frame that held such a titanic spirit.
In her maternal aspect, she may be described as a really good woman.
The best instincts of her sex were by no means absent.
She remains an enigma, a woman who conquered hearts that had resisted all others.
Not a siren, but a queen. Not a witch, but a mother.
She tossed about her the fabric of her complex circumstances, like a mantle of light and darkness.
Her happy wit and ready words served her to the end.
By the gods!
Did they use the rest of your brain to forge this helmet? The only Ptolemy to speak the tongue of her people. I am your pharaoh.
She was a mosaic of contradictions, haughty yet simple, wild yet dignified. Though her nature may have been voluptuous, it was tempered by duty.
Her personal charm and magnetism were very great, outliving her physical beauty. With the sensitive nostrils and appearance of good breeding that marked her lineage.
Her lips appearing to be finely chiseled, which spoke so many languages.
Egypt. The clear-cut features that faced the might of Rome. The daintiness that belied her strength. White-skinned, dark-haired, a daughter of Macedon and Egypt.
Her grace of manner was as irresistible as her voice.
An audacity, a capriciousness, which enchanted those around her. Though at times she was haughty and proud.
Accentuated by a somewhat naive and childish manner.
Tossing about her the fabric of her complex circumstances.
After due consideration of all the evidence, we must conclude she was a victim of her own legend.
A faithful partner to two great men. The last survivor of the triumvirate era.
A devoted African-American mother, about 35 years old, who loved fiercely.
The Queen of Kings.
Splendid to hear and to see. Capable of conquering the hearts which had resisted most obstinately. Cleopatra.